Okay, welcome back. You guys are really good. That's the first self-correcting quiet down that I've witnessed here. So, hope you enjoyed your lunch. I think. Well, let me know what you think. How are we doing so far on this program? Yeah. So, and I think it's about to get a little bit better. Okay. So, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dan Almasy, Vice President of Human Resources and Security for Raytheon's Intelligence, Information, and Services business, to introduce a very special friend and our afternoon keynote speaker, Ellen McCarthy.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope lunch went well. So I'm going to kind of can my canned remarks just real quick. At the end of the day, Raytheon's proud to be a sponsor, a premier sponsor for the event, and this is a fantastic event. I was telling Ellen, I believe, earlier, how we do things like this at the company, but I can tell you this is phenomenal. Between the speakers that you have and just the questions and dialogue, it's just a great event. So we're proud to be here. And that note, there's just one other question that kept coming up about speaking up. So there's a couple questions earlier. I can tell you as a male, working for a big company, 16,000 employees, many times in the last 3 to 5 years, I've felt the same exact way. And I did not ask the question just because I thought, boy, that's a stupid question. And I can tell you, when it's asked, all the senior leaders in the room, more senior than me, they wanted to ask the same stinking question. So they don't know the answer either, so just ask the question. And I had a good baseball analogy, but I'm going to leave it because I'll run out of time. But I coached 3 little baseball teams in my spare time, and man, the similarities between a big company and the behaviors, and because we didn't talk about capabilities, but to get a T-ball team to kind of work together to get an out is a lot like a big company. But that said, and I mean that in all the good ways. But with that as backdrop, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon, the Honorable Ellen McCarthy, Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, BNI. In this capacity, Ellen leads the INR in its mission to harness intelligence to serve U.S. diplomacy through 3 key activities: all source analysis, intelligence policy and coordination, and analytic outreach, Established in 1947, the INR, and I didn't know this, obviously I did my research, but it's the oldest civilian intelligence element in the U.S. government. Ms. McCarthy has held numerous positions in the IC, including COO of the NGA, when Tisch was the director at the NGA. And Ellen also served as president of INSA from 2008 to 2012. So just incredibly accomplished background. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Ellen McCarthy.
Good afternoon. It's so good to be here. I'd like to thank INSA and Suzanne for asking me to come here today. For those of you who know me, I am a big proponent of women in the IC, and I have to agree with you, Dan. I think this event really sets the standard and sets the bar for others across government. So I was sitting with Suzanne a couple months ago, and I was asking her for some ideas on things to talk about. And we said, we really could use some discussion on work-life balance. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, maybe I'm not the right one to talk about work-life balance right now because I don't really have any. So I'm not sure that that's the topic that I should discuss. But I will come back in 2 years because, again, this is all about a choice. And so I think in 2 years, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to be happy if you ask me to talk about work-life balance because it's very important. So that night, I went home, and I sat down, and I said, okay, family, what should I talk about? And I have a 17-year-old daughter named Eileen, and she said, I'm so tired of hearing these women complain. She said, you should just do something. And I looked at her and I said, you pipsqueak. I mean, what the heck are you talking about? I mean, you can say that because your great-grandmother, your grandmother, and I put you in a place where you can say something as ridiculous as that. And then she came back, and she's a fighter, and she said, well, wait a minute, you've got the amazing women of the IC, you've got these women's groups at all these agencies. She said, Mom, you all have been doing this for years. She says, I've met you. You are incredibly powerful. Just do something. And at that point, my husband Gordon, who's the great mediator in our family, interjected and said, you know, business and government should really start setting targets, and they should really look at measuring the results, and that's really the only way you're going to incentivize change. And so I thought, well, these are some good ideas. And then when I thought about, sort of where we are right now as a country, you look at sort of the economic and national security imperatives that are just in our face right now. So at the Bureau of INR, I spent a lot of time with my boss talking about China, and talking about Huawei, and talking about ZTE, and talking about this incredibly interconnected global economy and where we are. And regardless of what you think about national security or the economic side of things, the reality is that there's a real chance that the US IT sector may not be on top over the course of the next few years. And that should scare the daylights out of us. And so that's something that I know Secretary Pompeo thinks a lot about. I just spent a day with the sissy for a full day, and that's what they really care about. So really, if you think about it, from an economic perspective, it's time for a change. And so really, to me that says, well, it's time to bring on more women. And then when you look at things from the IC perspective, there was an incredible article that just came out. Amy Ziegert and Mike Morrell wrote Spies, Lies, and Algorithms. It was in the May-June issue of Foreign Affairs. And I'll tell you, that article really resonated with me. Not because it recommends setting up an open source agency, it's not so much that part of it, but it really talks about how the IC has succeeded for so long based on money and people. And for the most part, we have been very successful because we can throw a lot of money and a lot of people at the challenges that we face in the day. But their point is that we really can't do that anymore, because the challenges we face are nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, more data, tools that help us organize the data, open source, quantum computing. I mean, that the reality is, this article says we need a whole new reimagining of how the IC needs to operate in order to face these new challenges. And so again, as I sit here and think, I've got a daughter who says, just do something, you're so powerful, and a husband who says, do measures, I realize, this is kind of like our Manhattan Project. I mean, really, the time to act is here. It's right here in our face. We've got a base that is incredibly energized. I mean, look at the people who are here today. We've got a highly energized base. We have an economic and national security imperative, and we have an intelligence community that's starting to look at things in a whole new way. And so I really want to talk today about the time to act. The time is now. This is our Manhattan Project. So I really want to talk about four things, because there's so many areas we could talk about, to include work-life balance, which is so crazy important. But I'm just going to talk about four things. I'm going to go through them briefly, and then I hope we can spark some discussion. So the first is the importance of leveraging existing networks that focus on women and diversity. Not only leverage the ones that are there right now, but to build your own. To hire more women and minorities. To set goals and measures. And lastly, to tackle the obstacles to attracting more women. And while there are many, I want to focus on bias and coming up with a new definition of what competence is. So let's first talk about leveraging existing support networks and building your own. Of all the actions I'm going to discuss, I really think this one is the most important one, because all the other things that we need to do can be facilitated and supported by this. So if you look at groups like Women in Technology, Women in Defense, Working Mother Media, Women in International Security, Lean In, yes, Tish, I'm even saying lean in. There's a story there. These groups have really fundamentally changed the way that organizations think about diversity and the value of women in their workforce. They've clearly articulated a business case, they've supported it with data, and their business case really applies to both the public and private sector. But we all know that organizational change is slow, but that you can act, you can help them. So you can join a women's group that's in your own company or in your own agency, and you can set up your own grassroots support network. So the groups that are in your companies and in your agencies are incredibly powerful. They're powerful because they provide you with a place to establish relationships, to develop friendships, to have someone to lean on during those hard times, to push you when you need to take a risk. They're also an incredible resource for your agency or company to help communicate the why it's important to have diversity, the why it's important to have more women in the workforce, the why we need to listen to this McKinsey report, and to why we need to do this. So these groups are incredibly valuable to leadership to help bring upon that change. But that's just part of it. I mean, I would challenge you to then set up your own network. So I know that we've talked about the amazing women of the IC here before. I don't know if you've talked about it again, but for those of you who are not familiar with it, I'll be really brief. That was sort of a grassroots effort on its own. This was not a company or a business that developed this. This was a group of women who said, you know, we want to get together and we want to do a little bit of reverse mentoring. But what came out of it was something so much more powerful than that. Not only do we do reverse mentoring, but we've become a support network. We've become our own source of what's coming down the line in terms of BD, pushing people. I will tell you from my own perspective, AWIC is a place that I've developed friends, I've developed mentors, I've hired some amazing women, and I'm pretty positive, actually I'm 100% positive, that I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for AWIC, in a political position at the Department of State. And I'll tell you, that's very interesting with AWIC. More than a few men want to play. It's this mysterious thing that's got all this power, and there's a lot of men who want to leverage this because they realize that it's a good thing. So I would say, build your own AWIC. I mean, I would think success for AWIC is when we see thousands of AWICs, thousands of these grassroots groups that are getting together to provide not only support to one another, but to help communicate this incredibly important message and business case about why it's important to have women in minorities in business. So that's the first one. The second one is just simple: hire more women. So the benefits of diversity are proven: new ideas, better results, happier employees. Yet in the US, the percentage of women in the workforce has pretty much stagnated since 2000. It was high in 1999 at about 60%, but it's come down and sort of maintained at a level about 57% ever since then. And I'm going to cite the Women in the Workplace 2018 report, which was by McKinsey and Lean In. And it says that since 2015, there's been absolutely no progress in making women's representation. There's fewer women than are men that are hired at entry level. At every subsequent step in the organization, the representation of women continues to decline, and it's even worse for women who have diverse backgrounds, women of color. They're the most underrepresented behind white men, men of color, and white women. So the funny thing is, though, that if we change things, I mean, if we continue to follow the path we are right now, it's going to take, if companies hire at current rates, the number of women in management will increase by 1% over the next 10 years. But if we engage, if we act, if we do some of the things that are recommended at events like this and within our own companies, we could achieve parity within the next 10 years at a 48 to 52%. So really, it's time to act, and we can all act. So it's by doing things like making sure that your friends and colleagues are aware of opportunities in your company or agency. It's about grooming them for them. And maybe you're even in a place where you can hire them. I'll tell you, at my last company in the private sector, I'll tell you that within a year, I had my first lawsuit ever. I've never had an investigation. I'm blessed, or I'm just incredibly lucky. But I had my first lawsuit. And it was because a man had accused me of only hiring women. And it was so interesting because when you looked, you saw that that just wasn't the case. But it just so happened my first hire was a woman. And so immediately the next one said, well, she's only hiring women, sued me. I was so happy because my leadership supported me. And the lawsuit went nowhere. It was absolutely ridiculous. But it was that concept of having your leadership support you. I hired this woman because she was the most qualified. It wasn't just that I hired a woman. But the reality is that depending on how you hire people, the processes they use, and you can all do this. If you find a woman and a man that are of equal caliber, it's a tough decision. I know what I would do. Number 3. Set goals and measures. This is Gordon's idea. He's my husband. I don't often say he's right. Don't tell him I said he's right here, but he was right. You know, really when you set, so this is just business 101. Articulate a business case, set goals, report on progress, report on success. These are keys to organizational success. And more companies need to put these practices into place. So again, as much as it kills me, citing the Lean In data, firms that have established hiring targets in 2017 have outpaced those that didn't set goals. So there's something to it. There's something to setting goals. In fact, I looked at some other data which showed that Fortune 500 companies that have at least 3 female directors have seen their return on invested capital increase by 66%. So there's something to this setting goals. And it just actually makes sense when you think about it. So until you put metrics in place, the way you do everything, the way everything else is done in business, I mean, you have to have measures. You have to report on outcomes. I mean, this is how you work in business. But setting targets alarms employees. It alarms both men and women, which really is a signal that your workforce doesn't quite understand the value of having women and minorities in it. It really is a case of you need to continue educating. They just don't understand the need for balance. And there's also this view that implementing targets is against the law. It's not. You just have to do it right. And I also think that a company's frustration over gender targets usually correlates with how poorly the company or government totally understands why it's important. So this is a case where those grassroots groups and groups like this are very, very helpful. And I'll tell you, it also shows that the why is so important, because I've worked in companies or agencies where the gender level has been pretty equal. And yet I've also seen where men still feel like they are being discriminated against. And while this may not be NGA, I do remember Tish, NGA stood for No Guys Allowed. And while there are organizations and agencies I worked in which are mostly balanced, women still feel like they're also being treated inappropriately. So it's not just about the balance, but it's the why, and it's communicating the why. So number 1 or 2 are they're very connected. So the fourth thing I want to talk about, and this is the one that I'm actually most interested in, and the one that I like the most, and that's to tackle the obstacles that are in place to attracting and retaining more women. And this is where work-life balance and programs that governments and companies have to get women are just, it's topic for another discussion because it's so crazy important. But I want to talk about bias, because I really think that while that's important, I think bias is maybe the most important part of all this. So if we get to this, both the conscious and unconscious, then I think we're really onto something. And it's so hard to prove. But bias, from my perspective, is a belief system that leads one to automatically and without awareness connect women with lower standards, or connect women as not as being good as men, or connecting women is only being good if they are the exception, vice the rule. And so as a result of bias, I mean, the data is amazing in that women tend to have to work 2.5 times harder as a man to be considered equally competent. That men are valued for competency and women like ability. I hate that. Women who bargain over salary almost always get paid more, but it comes at a cost. Again, they have to be likable. Women are frequently silenced. This is an interesting data point, that women only speak about 25% at corporate meetings, and at those same meetings, men will interrupt other men twice every 3 minutes, but men will interrupt women 3 to 4 times every 3 minutes. That's twice as much. So don't tell me there's not bias, because there's absolutely bias. So this goes to, then how are you going to fight bias? And I really think it's about discerning the difference between confidence and competence. And I think we really need to talk about that one. We really need to focus on that one. So I'll tell you, I talk about the likability part. When I was at NGA, I had one particular senior leader who was trying to help me by saying, "You're just too nice." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're too nice. You can't be effective and be nice." And I realized, well, first, about the 5th time he said that, I told him to F off. But so clearly, I'm not that nice. But it also was a sign that right now, it was incumbent on me to change the way I behaved, vice it was incumbent on him to change the way he thought. And I'm tired of being told to change the way I behave. I think it's time to redefine what confidence and competence is and change the measures for success. And it's about changing the way other people think. And I think as business leaders sitting in this room, as government leaders at all levels, you can do that. I mean, we can act on that now. So we're fooled to believe that men are better leaders than women. I read this incredible article that was on LinkedIn. I've actually shared it with those of you who follow me. And it says, "Why do so many incompetent men become leaders?" It's actually written about 4 years ago. It's a great article. Tomas Chamorro Premusic cites that the only one advantage that men have over women is hubris. It's often masked as charisma and charm, which is commonly mistaken for leadership potential and occurs more frequently in men than women. So I'll tell you, this really struck me because I'm sitting at the United States State Department right now. And every day there's elections in foreign countries and there's these leaderless groups. And you know what? They tend to hire or vote self-centered, overconfident, narcissistic men that can't manage their way out the door or out the country. So there's something here. And the reality is that the majority of nations, companies, societies, and organizations, they're poorly managed. It's indicated by their longevity, revenues, and approval ratings. Good leadership has always been the exception, not the norm. So I do think that arrogance and overconfidence are inversely related to leadership talent. The ability to build and maintain high-performing teams, to inspire followers, to set aside self-agendas, to work for the common interest. The best leaders are humble. And humility is more a feature that is found in women or associated with women than men. So the same paradoxical implication here is that the characteristics that enable managers to rise to the top of government or corporate ladders is actually responsible for their downfall. And so, in other words, what it takes to get the job is not at all what it takes to do the job well. And so what do? We change the paradigm. You change the definition. And so I think it's all about the definition of confidence. And this means rewriting position descriptions, job ads, performance development goals, and qualifications that reflect the following: leaders who elicit respect and pride from their followers, leaders who communicate their vision effectively, leaders who empower and mentor subordinates, leaders who approach problem solving in a more flexible and creative way, leaders who fairly reward direct reports. So if we rewrote the PDs, the ads that had words that sounded more like that, I mean, that is your first step to rewriting what competence is vice competence. So the definition of competence needs to reflect what brings women to the table. Although I'm going to end on this point because this is an alternative strategy that actually intrigues the not so nice part of me, which is, or we need to set up career obstacles that we can put in the way of incompetent men. So with that, I'll take questions. Do you want me to do this on my own, Suzanne? Okay. Now, I understand that this side has been very quiet, and this side has been very vocal. So, what's going on? Any questions? It's from me to you. Anything you disagree with there? I was a little provocative on a couple things. I kind of did that on purpose.
Hi, Ellen. Over here on the quiet side. Rhonda Schrank from USGIF. That was very provocative, and I enjoyed it very much. Yes. Thank you. What led you to having the chutzpah and the provocative approach to life that you have now? Was there a turning point, or did this start way back?
Was there a point where I thought I could come up here and just say, let's put obstacles in front of incompetent men? I think, Rhonda, I think I'm going to say that it was a bunch of things. It was, growing up in a household where I could do whatever I wanted to do, pretty much, and I was always supported. I had a father who was very provocative. I have a mother who remains very provocative. And so having them as role models so I have to say, I can't think of one time that made me be this way. I've used my waitress story before, and that's actually a true story. And I think a lot of it was waitressing. And I think it's because I always knew that there was a plan B, that if this job didn't work out, I could always go back to waitressing because I was really good at it. And people think I'm just joking, but I'm actually not joking. My kids are mortified when I say I'll just go work at Ramparts as a waitress to pay for Syracuse. But I'm not. I'm actually not, because I grew up in a time where you got 2 or 3 jobs. You had to get stuff done, and knowing that there's a plan B, knowing that that you can take a risk because if it doesn't work out, you can go do something else, is very powerful. Also, surrounding yourself, and this gets to the network, surrounding yourself with highly supportive friends, family. I think that's critical. That's why I think my #1 recommendation was the value of these sorts of events. the groups that are in almost every company and government agency, setting up your own group. I mean, there's just incredible, I talked about AWIC a little bit, but I'll tell you, for me, it has been life-changing. And it was funny because I think, there's a few of us here who actually helped found it, and I think the thought is that, we were going to help others, when the reality is I got so much more out of it than I think anybody that I was able to help in terms of understanding what's going on, understanding what's important, being willing to take a risk, because you know what, you always go back to AWIC, and there's always going to be somebody there who's going to want to talk to you and or advise you. So there you go. Yeah, hey, Suzanne.
Hi, Suzanne with INSA. Ellen, I happen to know that you really actually do like men a lot.
Oh, I love men.
and so can you point out to us maybe who has been one of the stronger male mentors in your life, quite possibly your father, or maybe someone that you have worked at currently or in past lives in your career?
It's there's a couple that I come off because I like that you mentioned my dad. A lot of people said when I was going to INR, Secretary Pompeo is, oh my gosh, he is an incredible leader. He is operational. He is fast. He thinks that it's graduated #1 from West Point. He is a no-nonsense guy. And for those of you who've worked at CIA, I talked to many of you, they've said this is a no-nonsense guy. He wants to get it done, get it done, get it done. And some people were very nervous about that. But I got to tell you, I had a father who was just like that. He did not suffer fools. I'll tell you, I worked for him when I was younger. He treated me worse than he treated everybody else. And I think it was because he wanted to toughen me up. And while I didn't appreciate it at the time, it actually later on turned out to be incredibly valuable. There's actually another man who really, and this sort of gets to, Rhonda, your question as well, who sort of changed things for me. When I worked at USDI for Tisch, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence was Steve Cambone, Dr. Steve Cambone. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of views on Steve Cambone, and I'll never forget the day that Tisch brought me in to meet him. I had just started there as a brand new Deisel, and he was reading his notes, his staff notes, and he never even looked up at me. When I came in the door, he never even looked up, because it was busy time. And I remember thinking, some people would have been incredibly insulted. And I'm sharing this story with you because I've shared this, he's given me permission to share this story. But I do remember saying, you know what, this guy is going to get to know me before it's all over. And because I'm going to show him that I can help him. I can help USDI. And you know what? I did. And I'll tell you, while that moment might have been a moment that would have killed some people, for me it was a moment like, I'm going to get to you. As it turns out, I did tell him this story later on. He was absolutely mortified, felt horrible. If you get to know him, he's not that guy at all, actually. And he's proven to be an incredible friend and mentor to me as a result of that. I did step it up. I did get to know him. I now look at him as somebody who I find so inspiring. And there's very few things that I do right now that I don't call Steve Cambone. And that exists today. So there you go.
My name's Julie Hansen, and I'm with the CIA. I love what you said about bias. And the research today shows that it's not just men who hold these biases against women, it's women as well. What do you see as a path for us to take to help to address that?
Yeah, I wonder if it's sort of the same. I chose to view bias as there's so many things that you can do with bias, and my choice was on the sort of redefining what success looks like or what the goal is, and using language that is far more gender neutral. So many times we'll define things one way and not the other. But you're right. I think it gets me that. When I was talking a little bit about the expectation is that women to succeed, they have to be more like men. And there's a lot of these organizations, I'll use Lean In as an example, that actually also advises that. I read one article that says that when you're in a meeting, you should put your hands on your hips and use your finger, and people will listen. And so, I think women have bought into that. But I'm really a believer in modeling the approach that will work. And I think we've got some incredible female role models, certainly in the IC now, who are not with their hand on their hip showing their finger. You know, they're mothers, they're daughters, they've succeeded, they've managed to walk this balance of you know, managing home and managing work, and they didn't lose themselves in the process. So I think you're absolutely right, bias exists on both sides, but I think the same applies. It's about changing the dialogue and changing our behavior. So again, I did tell that guy, I'm not going to change who I am. You know, this is who I am. And I also did tell him, but I think you have to change. And if it was a woman, I would have said the exact same thing, like, what are you talking about? So, because it's so interesting, that gets to the data point about women are capable of advocating for themselves, but then they're treated differently as a result. That's not good. You know, we don't want that. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Maggie Feldman Pilch. I'm the founder of NatSec Girl Squad. We're big fans of AWIC. We're a community of about 13,000 people committed to competent diversity in national security and defense. And so much of what you've said so resonates with me. I deeply regret the iced coffee I had just before you started talking, because now I'm all ready to go. Our membership is incredibly diverse, and exactly to the point you just made, you know, it's not most of the time the people that come to talk to me, they don't need to change something they're doing. It's maybe how they're received. But at the end of the day, the most significant challenge we're seeing with our members is security clearances and security clearance reform. And I'm hearing a lot today about what to do once you get in the door, which is great. But I have literally tens of thousands of young people, and not as young people, women and not women, who are staring at me saying, I speak 3 languages, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and no one will sponsor my clearance. And particularly at a time where government service isn't everybody's dream job, it's my dream job, but whatever. What do we do? I mean, there's a lot of conversation about this, but you seem like someone who is not afraid of answering this question.
No, I mean, well, you know, Sue Gordon, I don't know if you asked her that question. She's not afraid of answering that question either. I mean, I said that I think the time is right. I think it's our Manhattan Project. And I really do think the IC is making some pretty amazing steps right now. Steps that I mean, I think some giant steps, both in how they're managing their workforce and on the security clearance side. I know there's this Workforce 2.0 initiative, and I'll tell you, I'm very excited by this because it does highlight new ways to recruit, new ways to develop people. You know, security clearance reform. Its time is now. Continuous evaluation. You know, we really are stepping out on that, and I think that's why this article really resonated with me, because the time is absolutely now. Otherwise, I think, you know, we're going to be too far back. So I know that's not answering your question, because I mean, really, it takes leadership. Takes people who are willing to just say, this is where we're going and this is what we're going to do. I'll tell you, I'm highly encouraged by some of the folks I'm seeing out there in leadership positions right now who are saying the same things I are with the same level of passion and who are willing to take a chance. So I'm highly optimistic. I wish I could give you an answer. It's like tomorrow we're gonna do continuous monitoring, and you know, one thing that gets me is, Suzanne, I know you gave me the opener on I do like men. I've been talking about women, but I've got to tell you that men are absolutely a part of this dialogue. In fact, I mean, half of my mentors have been men. I mean, I think I was trying to get to it, maybe I didn't articulate it as clearly as I needed to, but the reality is there's a solid business case for diversifying your workforce. There's a solid business case for bringing in more women. I mean, the data shows it, every company that does it. And so the reality is that I think we've got a lot of allies across the private sector and the public sector that says, yeah, this is a problem, we've got to work together. And so I'm so excited to see, I mean, easily 50% of the folks here are men. So if I insulted anybody, I apologize. Kind of.
Hi, I'm Lauren Rosser with AWS. This is a great community and everybody's supporting everybody, but unfortunately, a lot of us probably have encountered women who have held other women back. How do you react to that, or how do you address women or respond to that?
Stop. I mean, I've got to tell you that I've been very blessed, because I've got to tell you, I have not had that happen to me personally. I've heard it happen, but I've got to tell you that I have been so blessed in that I have I've always worked for women who've been supportive of one another. But I will give you one observation. I have found that some of my best mentors were those up to the male mentors stopped at about GS 15. Now, it may have been a case that most of my bosses were men. It was the 80s and 90s, and so there was not a lot of women there. But when it came to making that leap from GS 15 to senior executive, it was absolutely women who helped me do that, who told me about opportunities, who reviewed packages, who gave me critical and substantive feedback on what I needed to do and what I didn't need to do. And it was actually two women, who were not only my mentors, but they were my sponsors, and they pushed me. And I really think that that's the model. And except it should be the model across your whole sort of career, which is the value of these grassroots groups, your networking. And by the way, those grassroots groups should include men. It should include men of all colors, to include Caucasian, because they will sponsor you. They will help you along. And if a woman is getting in your way, just walk around her, because you're going to continue moving up. That's just ridiculous. So.
Is this on? I think it's on. There we go. You just touched on it. I just wanted to say that I think in two of the questions about women being in the way, I'd like to take it away from these individuals. And I think it's that one of the reasons we really started AWIC, aside from reverse mentoring, was we wanted women to be able to just be around each other, to grow that kind of support where you like each other. And I feel that a lot of the women that might be put in, because I've had those experiences, unlike Ellen, I've had the same as you. I think they were very alone when they came up. There was less women. They had less support. They maybe felt they had to be more like a man or give up things in their life to get those jobs. That's no longer the case. Work-life balance absolutely does come into this. And by having these grassroots organizations, we're creating networks where we start to like each other more and not want to backstab, and we want to celebrate each other's successes and announce that and create that example. Men have actually always done that, right? They go to the bar and they talk about work together. They don't just talk about their kids. They talk about strategy and how to help each other and how to get up the ladder. And that's what we want. And really neat men that empower and support us, they're teaching us that. They're like, we ask them those questions and they tell us, this is what you guys don't do. This is what guys do. Do more of that. I think that's all really relevant, and it all comes at a casual space more than writing some policy to tell people what they're going to do, right? This has to come from your own heart. You have to want other women to succeed as much as yourself. It's that too, right?
I think so, and I think based on what I'm seeing here, that we're at it's our Manhattan Project. It's our moment. So,
yeah. It's amazing.
It's great. Well. Are we done? Hello.
Good afternoon, the Honorable.
Hello.
I'm Peggy Evans. I'm
are.
affiliated with Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technologies. One of the things we haven't talked about yet today is, particularly in the analytical community, but also in the policy community, what do you think the differences are, if any, between men and women when they face an ethical dilemma? And I don't mean a Me Too one, I mean a professional one, having their analytical judgments questioned, or feeling like they're being asked to do something that's not consistent with procedures and policies, or just their fundamental sense of morality.
Wow. I mean, I have to say, so at INR, first, a number of hands, who knows who INR is? That's good. That's better than most places I go to. So INR, the Bureau of INR is both the State Department's intelligence element, and it's an element within the United States intelligence community. And it has a long history of being, I mean, they affectionately know themselves, the analyst, as the footnote. And that means that in NIEs or in any sort of community document, there's almost always a dissent, and it's almost always INR. And so, but they're right a lot of the time. In fact, I'm a little biased now because I've been there. They're right all the time. They're super good. I have to say the analysts at INR are probably the best, next to Navy, Sandy, I've met. So, but they're pretty good. And that really is a culture. I mean, within INR, they call it the Happy Bureau. And I think the reason is it's a culture that is pretty inclusive of all viewpoints. It's celebrated no matter whether you're a man or a woman or whatever you are. You're allowed to do that. In fact, it's encouraged. And I'll tell you, that's one reason you're 17, 18, 19 years on your area, your world of work. And you're really good, and you're embedded with the Foreign Service, so you have this incredible relationship with your customer. Foreign Service officers rotate in and out, and so you're always aware of what's important, why, what are we doing? And I'll tell you, that's a model that I really think needs to be applied across government right now. And so, I mean, I have to say that, I'm not going to answer your question, but I have to say that in my experience at INR, that's not a problem, whether you're, and I'll tell you that even now in the 3 months that I've been at State, we regularly report intelligence up to the policymaker that's not consistent with the policies that are being looked at. And I'll tell you that we're not being shamed, we're not being pushed back against. I think part of it is we have a secretary who used to run an intelligence agency, so he expects it. We also know that support to policy is a little different than support to defense and law enforcement, where you need to know who's behind the door or where the ship is going. It's much fuzzier. So again, INR is a great model for how it can be, because just because the policy is not consistent with the intelligence does not mean your intelligence doesn't have value. So thanks. Yes. Yes, ma'am. I can hear you. I can repeat your question.
Thank you. More a comment than a question is that I think we as humans are limited, and so we are going to trust unlike those who are like us. And traditionally, the workplace has been managed by men, so most likely I can see them, throughout my life, that they like and trust other men, and they can put themselves in their shoes, while literally men do not see themselves in our shoes. No. Do they?
No.
So I think we need to continue working with the male population in our workplaces and home, everywhere, to convey to them that they need to open their hearts. And a lot of it is about being flexible, and even physically they can be less flexible than we are, and accept us for who we are and not feel threatened.
I'm so glad you went there. So a couple of points I'd like to make, and I agree with you completely. So the first thing, diversity is hard. It's really hard. And again, I was reading some studies that showed that when you look at companies that are diverse, they will perform better than those companies that are more homogenous. So you've got a group of men or a group of women who've all known one another, they're all just alike. The diverse group will outperform every time the group that's alike. But it's hard to do that. It's hard to bring things that are not alike together. They tell you as a leader that your leadership team should not look like you. Even though you may be more comfortable with somebody that looks like you, the reality is that you want people who fill in gaps in your capability, or who are smarter than you, in my case. But that's not easy, because that means you have to think about how you communicate, how you get along, how you set targets, my hope is that when you look at the business case for it, though, every time diverse groups outperform. So there must be something to this. And in the data, it shows it. But that's not enough, because we've still got this tendency to surround ourselves with people who look just alike. So that's why I'm here today to say it's time to take action. It's time to communicate what the business case is for all of this. And I do think we need to change the measures for success, because I think it's hard to change bias. It takes an awfully long time. I do think there is this inclination on the part of men, and I don't think there's data here to show it, that men do think that they're smarter. But that doesn't mean they think they're smarter than women. They think they're smarter than everything. I mean, I've got a son. I mean, he's amazing, and he's so confident. And I don't think he thinks he's smarter than me because I scare him a little bit. But we have to change what the definition is of competence, because nobody's the smartest. There's always somebody smarter than you, and it may be a woman. So we do have to change that paradigm. We do need to change the definition. I think where you start is in the language you use when you recruit people, when you measure people, when you identify outcomes. I think it has to be more gender neutral. So for the coding community, I saw somebody highlighted an ad saying, we're looking for the ninja of coders who can take down any problem. I'm fairly confident my 17-year-old daughter is not interested in that ad. You know, she doesn't want to be a ninja, she doesn't want to take anybody down. But when advertising for a coder, use language that says, you know, we want people to solve hard problems, who can help, who are outcome focused, who want to work with teams. I mean, I think those are the steps we can do now to bringing in, because we'll work the men's side of the house. We've worked a few right now. Look at all the men sitting here right now. So clearly those years of studies and integration and the business case and being married to good women and having strong moms has helped, because look at all the men here today. So, and I think we're on it. It's our Manhattan Project. We got to do it. Is that it? So thank you, Insa. Thank you.
Okay. Don't leave yet. Ellen, as usual, for those of you that haven't heard Ellen speak before, she never ceases to amaze. That was terrific. Thank you. And Ellen, thanks for your candor today and your long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion. Our community is a lot stronger for your leadership. And I'm going to ad-lib something here, which is always dangerous, okay? But you know, we've talked about having mentors and so forth. Ellen and I have kind of taken turns mentoring each other for the last 15 years or so. It's worked out pretty well for me. I don't know about how for you, but it's certainly been something that's been special for me. But I got to witness something not too long ago at Ellen's swearing in. And it was, I mean, it was a wonderful event down at the State Department and so forth. But I think this is a good example of something. At her swearing in, after she had been sworn in, probably, but Ellen looked at her new boss, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and said, quote, well, maybe it's not a quote, I'm maybe paraphrasing a little bit, but you can correct me. But she said, I'm going to work really hard with the amazing analysts at INR and in the rest of the IC to discern the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth, and you're going to listen to me. That's what she said to the Secretary of State. I think so I give you that example because I think that's the kind of courage that we all wish we had. I think that's the kind of courage many of our speakers were kind of telling you today and encouraging you to find that courage within yourself. So Ellen, thanks for the example you set.